Hello, everyone, and welcome to the webinar Guardians of Good, Fortifying NGO Cyber Defenses. My name is Chelsea Connard, and I am the report analyst for the Cyber Threat Alliance, and I'm joined by Ian, Diana, and Alex, and I'll have you three introduce yourselves.
Hi, I'm Ian Gottesman. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of the NGO ISAC. We're a community to help improve cybersecurity for nonprofits.
Hey, and I'm Diana Langley. I am from NetHope and I am our COO. NetHope is an association of the world's largest INGOs, about 65 of them. And specifically, I'm here because we provide quite a lot of cybersecurity support to them in this moment.
And hello, everyone. My name is Alex from the Cyber Peace Institute, where I focus on all NGO interactions and engagement through the Cyber Peace Builders program, where we provide free cybersecurity assistance to this organization.
Great, thank you all. We're so excited to have these three groups with us. So this webinar is a product of our work on the Joint Analytic report, in which we were collaborating on cyber threats to NGOs. So to kick things off, as highlighted in our report, NGOs face many of the same cyber threats as other industries. However, the nature of these threats can be quite unique, with NGOs often targeted opportunistically for financial gain or by nation-state actors. Can you all share the most common cyber threats that NGOs are currently facing and explain how these threats are distinct to the NGO sector?
I reckon I'll kick it off. So our INGOs, and by that I should be a little bit clear about it, we're talking about the large multinational NGOs. Most of them have operating revenues of over 50 million US dollars, etc. That means that they inevitably face all the cybersecurity risks that you would expect, phishing and spear phishing and ransomware and all those kinds of things. But what is specific to them is that they're also, that would be opportunistic, but they are specifically targeted because many of them are human rights defenders, or they have a lot of data on refugees or on marginalized groups. And so we see a lot of that sort of nation state attacks as well, and vulnerabilities that are exposed by bad actors who are looking for political gain and those kinds of things. And I think, Ian, you have a part of the story as well, yeah?
Yeah, I mean, we have a lot of overlap with the groups that Diana and Alexandra are working with. The threats that nonprofits see aren't unique. They're the same threats, I think, that any other organization sees. I mean, the most common, obviously, is business email compromise, where people send out, invoices or Apple iTunes gift cards or any way to get money out of an organization that they can. And then the most complicated and the most hard to deal with are advanced persistent threats, which are state-sponsored actors that are trying to attack organizations because they're oftentimes seen as more influential than they are, because there's a lack of understanding of the nonprofit sector outside of and civil society sector outside of just outside of those organizations, and that they have more ability to do things. So you'll see people trying to influence elections or trying to influence public policy decisions or understand what's going on by trying to get into civil society actors or nonprofits, when those organizations don't really have the ability to defend themselves against such big actors. So that's a complicated problem that nonprofits have to face, in addition to the standard problems that every organization has to face of ransomware and business email compromise and phishing, and I don't know, there's a million things. It's a million things, a million kinds of different types of crime that are happening on the internet. Alex, I know you have some.
Yep. Thank you, Ian, and thank you, Diana. I just really want to add to what you guys just mentioned. So end of last year, we actually conducted a small study based on NGOs here in Geneva, where we managed to identify that maybe the top 3 cyber threats or attacks that tend to target NGOs the most are: number one, phishing, by far is the most recurrent, let's say, type of attack or threat. Then we're looking at ransomware, an increasing number, especially from what we noticed from the beginning of this year in particular. It's quite funny. And also then third, business email compromise or CEO fraud. Now, I'm not going to reiterate. I mean, Diana and Ian really explained it extremely well. I'm just going to add that in terms of impact, we have to keep in mind that these organizations, they provide critical services to more than 1 billion individuals around the world, be it civil society, general services such as access to information, democracy, human rights, or maybe more, let's say, concrete support such as access to healthcare, to sanitation. So this is where a cyber attack can create a lot of damage to some extent, and of course on the organization itself, but also on the beneficiaries of these nonprofits, of these NGOs.
Yeah, thank you all. And given that many of these NGOs are facing significant cybersecurity challenges that are disproportionate to their limited resources, how are your organizations helping these communities enhance their cybersecurity posture?
So at the risk of doing the same order again, I would say that collectively, we are all providing gap support a lot right now, immediate gap support in terms of vCISO services, so chief information security officers and consultancy and all that kind of thing. We're also, for us in NetHope, we are looking at a community of practice. So we have stood up the Global Humanitarian ISAC, which is effectively platforming. Can we do peer-to-peer knowledge sharing? Can we do threat sharing? Can we do even resource sharing? So for example, many private companies offer a lot of support, but unless you know who's offering, it's incredibly difficult to figure out how that can plug into your infrastructure. So that's what we're doing. But I'd also say that our organizations together and individually are doing considerable work on advocacy, because part of the quote unquote problem here is that nobody really thinks of NGOs as needing big cybersecurity that like the same level that the private sector would need. And so a bit to Alex's point, you don't really consider the fact that if, for example, Oxfam gets hit by a ransomware demand, then half the sanitation goes down in Zatari refugee camp, which is the 4th biggest city in Jordan. So that becomes a bit of a problematic space where people don't really realize that the impacts on, again, 1.5 billion people. So we have to do a lot of advocacy in the space about how we're funded, what is funded, and where we can actually deduplicate even our efforts as the helpful NGOs in the space so that we go further and quicker together.
I can go next if you like, so we can. On our side, at the Institute, we focus quite a lot on, let's say, small to medium NGOs in general. We're currently working with a bit more than 300 of them. And what we do is practically give them access to a very easy, comprehensible assessment tool that can help them identify their areas of improvement. And then based on those areas of improvement, we can provide them with concrete engagements, or how we call them missions that then are shared with specialized cybersecurity experts coming from all around the world who volunteer through our Cyber Peace Builders program to then connect with these NGOs, help them with maybe awareness training, do vulnerability scans, conduct dark web monitoring for them, maybe some more technical missions in terms of implementation, or just advice sessions on, well, how do I do my backups properly in today's time and age, because there are so many different solutions. And also finally, to help these NGOs to develop their own policies to be, better enabled to withstand cyber attacks. And all this with this idea of, first of all, preventing the potential harm and impact of a cyber attack. And then secondly, making sure that, okay, knocking in wood, if this happens, that the actual impact is very limited and that the NGO is aware and well equipped to respond to that specific incident, which is also a whole dimension in itself. Apart this, we also do a lot of research and analysis of threats, but we also do advocacy, just like Diana mentioned, trying to go out to the international community, explaining why this is an important topic, why NGOs, why nonprofits actually need better policies and support to be well defended in this digital space in order for them themselves to have the ownership to develop their own digital, let's say, resilience more broadly, if you may. Thank you.
And then just to kind of follow up, so we are an ISAC, an information sharing and analysis center, specifically set up for nonprofits here in the United States. We include organizations that are really small, like 4 or 5 people that are, say, studying North Korea, to really big organizations like the ones that you get postcards from and things that are trying to fix diseases or fix, tame, work on wildlife in other countries or even in the United States. So what we try to do is create a community within the nonprofit sector of these about 200 organizations, 170, something like that, where they can share information and share expertise and get help from their peers and their peer organizations, and also from partners, big technology companies that work on cybersecurity, as well as some small ones that are sort of niche and specialized in working with nonprofits. And I think the idea is that the idea or the analogy is that cybersecurity is a team, and that there's no competition in making things better in our sector, and that you want the same threat actors that a think tank might see or somebody starting in North Korea might see are the same threat actors that are going after the whole others in the nonprofit that are doing the same work. And it gets very complicated if you're doing those things alone, but it's much easier if you're doing them together and if you can ask questions and work as a community.
And I think, Ian, you remind me that we should really mention that all of our organizations are helping the NGOs, but the NGOs themselves are then immediately turning around and helping their community, helping their local governments, bringing people into the same conversation. So any effects that we have are definitely amplified and ripple effects. So again, us working together just makes that even more impactful in the communities that they work with, which I really like. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
Sorry, Ian, go
ahead, Alex.
I just wanted to add to what you were saying, and Diana, is that maybe it might not seem as a big impact, but we're speaking about, each NGO, when they join our respective organization, they will have to define a point of contact. Some of them might have experience in IT or cyber, others might not. And I think it's so enriching and so, in the end, I think impactful is the right word to see these people who might not have so much, let's say, cyber knowledge, acquiring it and integrating it and becoming then the lead within their own organization to create this change when it comes to cyber. And I think that's magnificent and really kudos to them. But just wanted to mention.
I mean, cybersecurity isn't the easiest thing in the world, but it's not the hardest either. And some of these organizations are doing really, really hard, complicated work. They're, going and working in refugee camps and providing sanitation, as Diana mentioned. They're matching volunteers to big, complicated tasks, as Alex mentioned. And I think that, organizations that can cure polio or create green corridors throughout the whole northern, Americas, from South America, from the tip of South America to the tip of North America, can also do cybersecurity too. It just takes a little effort and a little concentration that maybe is relatively new to our sector.
Great additions, thank you. And I'm thinking now to dive into the topic of data. So in creating this joint analytic report, we encountered challenges to analyze data due to the lack of data that's specifically labeled for NGOs. The cybersecurity field at large is experiencing a general data shortage, and the NGO community has been particularly underserved, often having to react rather than proactively defend. So what can be done to improve data gathering and analysis to better support NGO cybersecurity?
I mean, I think this is really up to these vendors that we're dependent on for some of our big services, like email and office infrastructure and things, that we need to collaborate with them and provide them the information. It's hard. I think the problem with data collection, like you were saying, isn't unique to the nonprofit sector, but it is worse there. And I think that we can collaborate with them, but we can't do it on our own. The nonprofits can't sort of come up with a standard of reporting cybersecurity incidents or creating work with law enforcement to do that. That's not what any of us are set up to do right now. Maybe at some point there will be nonprofits to do that or other organizations to do that. But we need to, again, kind of work across the sector and collaborate with our private sector partners in particular and provide the information that's needed, because they're the ones that have the much larger vision of what's happening, not just across our sector, but across much larger, across the whole globe.
Yeah, on my side, I'm just going really to join what Ian mentioned, and also that we should be aware that most NGOs, they might not have an infrastructure in place that is then going to allow them to properly store data or generate data or traces, or then really, go by next generation endpoint protection software. No, it doesn't make sense for them because they don't really have the infrastructure in place. So I think to some extent, we should start maybe, even earlier by helping these NGOs to some extent, building up this infrastructure and making sure that it's secure. And then as an added benefit, if you may, actually being able to have this monitoring and data sharing. But as Ian said, this is really going to go back to the big vendors of this data. There are still gaps in this. And I think that, yeah, all by working together and by, sharing this information, we can actually strengthen the whole sector really.
I think I would just have to really agree with my colleagues here, because to be explicit about it, we find that especially passive threat intel, let's say that comes from a big provider, never has a carve out for NGOs or think tanks specifically, or very rarely. And even if it does, and Ian mentioned this actually in one of our calls before this, there is a vast difference between the pet shelter or the library down the road and how they get attacked versus, for example, the Red Cross or Human Rights Watch. And those two things are not necessarily comparable even in that bucket. And so we really struggle with what is coming our way. But then to add the other part is that then you can say, well, maybe the NGOs should provide their own data. Maybe they should make surveys and those kinds of things. And all three of our organizations do assessments on the NGOs that we serve, and we publish quite a bit on that. We've done both to a set of framework controls, so we centralized on the CIS controls so that we can benchmark to each other across a range of things. But we also do on sentiment a piece there, but it's very rare that you find it, and we segment ourselves quite significantly in the sector. So that is complicated to find the data. I'd also say, because it's NGOs serving NGOs, we're having to find funding to help us do that research about ourselves. The same funding that is potentially going into doing actual protection work, like, can I just buy you better licenses, please, instead of asking you how bad it is in your infrastructure. So, and that's a very complicated place for us to be in, to then balance those requirements.
Yeah, thank you. And that's a great segue then to ask, how can we foster greater collaboration within the NGO cybersecurity community?
Friend, shall I start us off? Here we go. All three of the organizations here have got agreements to work together. We did that for a range of reasons. One is we can't afford to be in competition with each other. We have to specialize so we can cover more of the need and not duplicate as much as we possibly can. So I think that can really be encouraged by our donors, by our big tech partners, by that kind of thing, to help us work together. We appreciate that in that moment. I think what is also great for fostering collaboration is when we're working with, for example, tech companies, that they recognize that there are different parts of this sector and that there are different answers. It's not one size fits all for everything, which seems obvious. If you were talking about business, for example, you would not address a multinational the same way you would address a small to medium mom and pop shop on the corner. But somehow when you say NGOs, it seems like, oh, well, it should also be very easy. So I think that's something very important that we would like to see greater collaboration on, and even folks through yourself, Chelsea, and through the CTA, that we all get to contribute because we have different parts of the supply chain and different parts of the story, I think is important.
Yep, I cannot agree more than what you would. I mean, Diana, it's really spot on in the sense of we're really trying to, maybe fill in the gaps between ourselves so we can actually take, more ground and actually try to see, okay, we each specialize into, let's say, one specific area, but we know that we can only, create a strong ecosystem by really working together. On our side, to some extent, we have, templates that are being developed internally by the volunteers. But then these volunteers, they actually, come from different companies, maybe from other NGOs. We have NGOs who have developed templates. We then kindly then just, share them back, with a wider network of. It's this idea of not reinventing the wheel, really, of using what we have and seeing how we can then best distribute it across the board. I don't think competition has, I mean, in my humble opinion, has any sense or any purpose here because but in the end, at the end of the day, we're not for profit, we're not private companies. We're really trying to have a positive social impact on those that we're trying to provide services and help. So I think it's really this, Diana said it super, super well.
Yeah, I agree. I think that, at our core, we're and as Alex said, we're in the social goods. Our mission is to improve society and at some level, and we've all worked in organizations that use technology and cybersecurity to do that. And we are clients or members or users or whatever the right phrase is, constituents. They are doing the same thing. They're helping improve social society. And as part of that, they're using technology, and they need to make sure that just like their doors have a lock or their windows are secure and all these other things, that their electronic, they have basic cyber hygiene and their electronic tools are secured, and that they've trained staff how to use them correctly and things like that. And it's maybe something that our sector has come to a little later than some other sectors, but we're here and we're going to catch up and we're going to do it together.
Yeah, and another great segue with reference to technology, what tools and platforms can NGOs leverage to improve their cybersecurity posture?
I love this question because Alex and Ian have got long lists of this.
Ian, would you like to start? You go. Yeah,
I'll start. I mean, I think in any tool that meets their needs. I mean, I don't, that's not a particularly helpful answer, but I think that they're using the same tools as the private sector and the government sector. They're using the Office suites and the creative suites and all these other things to carry out their day-to-day work. The difference being they don't have as much money and time to do it. So vendors that can help understand that and can make that transition easier, it's important. I think also vendors that can meet the organizations where they are and help them from, help them sort of crawl, walk, run, and help in a collaborative environment. That's really important. I think that the members of places like CTA and others know the complexity of cybersecurity and know some of the tools that will work well, but they maybe need to translate those in terms of complexity for nonprofits and pricing for nonprofits. And that's it's a tough road to hoe to figure out how, when you're making a budget, how do you decide what are you going to buy the new fancy shiny cybersecurity endpoint detection and response tool, or are you gonna do something that buy a bunch of iPads so your monitoring and evaluation team can go out and check how your work is going? And that's a complicated question that IT people and leadership in nonprofits are trying to make every day. And I think it would be, they could use some help there and making sure their resources go as far as they can.
And just to add to what Ian said, like he mentioned, there are many NGOs who might not have the resources or the budget for this, but they also do not have the knowledge that there are many products that are at massively discounted prices that are specifically, let's say, created to some extent, but also adapted to the needs of non-profit organizations, of NGOs. So that's already a big step to actually look out for. There are also some, let's say, open source free cybersecurity tools. Some of them very easy to use, like, for example, Have I Been Pwned, where you can just, drop in your email address, either personal or professional one, and you can see if you've ever been into a data breach. You also have maybe a bit more sophisticated ones like Virus Total. Sophisticated, not because it's complicated to use, no, but it might require some manipulations from your side with links, with files, and just to avoid you clicking on the link or the file to activate something that you don't want, it's better than to reach out to one of us or some experts that can actually handle this. But I would say that really my main takeaway is adding to what Ian said is that NGOs, there are many bundles and deals for NGOs specifically, starting from the big vendors, but also smaller ones that are trying really to address the needs of these organizations, knowing their limited resources as well.
And I would definitely, there is a bunch of stuff that it's a Google away, including just putting MFA, which is multi-factor authentication, where you have to use your phone to sign in. Like, according to every piece of research, that is still the #1 way that you can keep yourself safe, and that is almost free for most NGOs. So there's really no excuse to not have that happening. And then I think if I was going to put something on the top here, is all of our groups will say, join a group of like-minded peer NGOs that thinks about this, because they will have recommendations. So you don't have to figure out this entire space. And if you are both, for example, if you're in a small NGO and you're, you are chief IT and chief HR and chief this and chief that, and you're now also trying to think of this, other people have done the hard work for you. They can get you started on the very basics to do. And that's what we would highly recommend for everybody.
Yeah, that's marvelous. And Ian framed it earlier to quote you in that cybersecurity is a team sport. So just as you were segueing us into Diana, you all are doing amazing with my flows here. What can our listeners do to support your organizations in this effort?
I'm totally going to jump in first. Go ahead, Ian. Yeah.
They can join. They can become partners with us. All of our organizations have room for more nonprofits to join and more for-profit companies to join. There's simple things they can do that don't require much. You can volunteer with Alex's organization if that's what's interesting to you as an individual, or you can do bigger, more complicated things like create programs for nonprofits, as a lot of the vendors have, that specifically work with them to improve cybersecurity. You can have threat analysts come into any one of our organizations and give information that's helpful to nonprofits. I mean, there's a million different ways you can get involved. The simplest thing to do is just come out and ask one of us or ask a similar organization. If you're a cybersecurity professional and you do that from 9 to 5, that's a great skill, and that may be what you want to do, but you may also love cats and dogs and want to volunteer at the cat and dog shelter. I mean, there's a million different ways you can help nonprofits, and they don't have to be complicated or fancy. They can be as simple as just showing up and helping somebody set up their computer or something like that.
And then I think I would be remiss if I didn't add on the top of Ian's part that we as a sector are also talking about the systemic problems about what starves our sector of good cybersecurity. One of them is as simple as Ian was saying, is that when we're talking about large organizations, especially tech organizations that are engaging in philanthropy or thinking about they're going to do NGO pricing on their core technology, for example, sometimes what's missed is that NGO pricing, secure by design, but also sometimes secure by paying. And that paying sets up an NGO to have a very complicated conversation with itself that almost inevitably is, I'll buy the cheaper version and not buy the security add-on, because, to Ian's point, and we've all made a point, like the NGO market is not making a business decision. It's making but how many lives am I not saving so that I can add that bundle in? How many food packets am I not buying? How much water am I not providing to buy that add-on? Which sounds brutal, but is really the conversation that's happening. So when we talk about how are you stepping philanthropically into the NGO space in a systemic level, business to business level? What does your program look like there? And there are organizations to provide support on that. We're one, but there are many others that provide tech companies with support on that. When you're thinking about your volunteering program, as Ian says, yes, cleaning up a beach is lovely and is an important piece, but you can also volunteer with your professional services. Those are and your professional expertise. In some ways, that's really needed. We would love people to do that. And then lastly, we also really appreciate when big tech companies and big businesses really take up the mantle of fighting for cybersecurity for us, because we're quite a small sector. We're doing other things. We're fighting for human rights and those kinds of things. So enabling us with your contacts, with your government reach, with those kinds of things really sets the stage to help nonprofits to have a better go of this in the future in the ecosystem that we're in.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I can maybe just try really to summarize what you guys said. It's really, I mean, there are lots of, let's say, interest on our side and opportunities as well to engage. And I think really the main takeaway is really reach out to us. Like, we are always open, ready to discuss, to learn from you, to I mean, provide you with our, but see how else we can maybe collaborate and work together. And yeah, I think that I will just close on reach out to us and really let us know, let us help if we can.
Great. And we are wrapping up. So in closing, we'd love to hear from each of you. What are you optimistic about in the field of NGO cybersecurity?
If I may start, I think we're seeing a bit more awareness. I think we're seeing these organizations understanding really what's at stake and taking this seriously first and foremost, in comparison to maybe 3 or 4 or 5 years ago when everything was at the beginning. I think, the digitalization they went through during the COVID pandemic, accelerated the trend, to uptake technology, understand it, implement it properly. So I would say this is what really makes me optimistic. Another thing that makes me optimistic is that this technology field in general is quite, let's say, it's constantly evolving, and it's really tending to attract people. And I think this is where we can maybe tap into and try to really attract people through this, let's say, field, and also try to translate complicated concepts, or especially now with artificial intelligence coming up and how that's going to impact cybersecurity, giving people access to and understanding also to this new development. But overall, yeah, I think we're all going in the right direction. Also, to close up, for me, it's really like having this kind of spaces, safe spaces where we can meet, cooperate, discuss, express our views, our thoughts, ideas, and see if we can find new avenues to collaborate. I think we do need more of this, and really to participate and take them with open arms. And thank you again to CTA for this opportunity, and to Ian and Diana to share the screen with you. Really, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm optimistic because I've seen the journey so far. I really got very involved in this work about 4 years ago. And at the time, our INGOs were in a lot of disarray about even to talk about the scale of the problem. Like we hadn't even decided on a framework, which was such a landmark moment for us to be able to compare ourselves to each other. And that's no longer the problem. 4 years ago, does your CEO even know what cybersecurity is? Oh, no. Whereas now we're approaching 80-90% find that their cybersecurity risks and portfolios are regularly discussed at the board level, for example, or with their trustees. And that's a huge difference. That makes a massive, massive difference in how these things are going. And I think what I'm also really optimistic about is that, at least in the INGO space, for example, if I'm offering grants to them now to do cybersecurity work internally, many of them are immediately pivoting that work to help local governments bolster their resources instead, or to teach a community about their digital rights and their cyber hygiene and those kinds of even digital resilience in the space. And so I feel like we're covering more ground almost internally in the NGOs, and you're starting to feel the impacts with communities and beneficiaries and those kinds of spaces, which makes me very optimistic about the space as we go forward.
I too just want to thank CTA and my partners here, Diana and Alex and NetHope and CPI. I think I'm optimistic because of the work we're all doing, because I can see the impact it's making, because I know that, you know, we're going to do this better together, that we can improve our sector that does so much. I mean, in the United States, it employs about 1/6 of the people, right? That's a lot. And we're catching up to where some of our private sector and government sector partners are, but we also can do big, complicated things. We're organizations that have done things like cure polio and a million different things that nonprofits are doing, bring peace to places like Ukraine and Russia, come up with ideas for things like that. So cybersecurity is well, it's not easy. It's one more thing we can do together, and that we organizations, nonprofit organizations, can help other nonprofit organizations, and we need our partners in the private sector to step forward with us. But in my experience, they've been doing a really good job with that, and when asked, they'll help. And I think that's where I'm optimistic, is that everybody's pulling together to do this.
Wonderful. Well, with that, thank you all for joining our conversation. Guardians of Good, Fortifying NGO Cyber Defenses. Thank you again to our speakers, Ian, Diana, and Alex from NGO ISAC, NetHope, and Cyber Peace Institute. It's truly been an honor to highlight your work, get to work with you with the production of our joint analytic report, and now to continue the conversation in the webinar. Thank you for your passion and your time. So those of you in our audience, for our listeners, we encourage you to check out this resource. We're reflecting upon the joint analytic report on the Cyber Threat Alliance website. And in addition to the joint analytic report, we also have produced a supplemental resource that has live links to additional resources. So we encourage you all to check that out. So with that, thank you for attending, and we wish you a great rest of your morning, afternoon, and evening. Thank you.